this is David Stark from WatcherPass.com, your website for movie reviews, interviews, and recommendations. Today, I'm joined by Adrienne Biddle of Unbroken Pictures and a producer on the all-new atmospheric horror film, The Dark and the Wicked. We're going to talk to Adrienne in just a second, but first, let's check out that trailer. And while you're watching, if you could like and subscribe to this channel, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
Your mama, she was saying things. She would sit right beside him just whispering. But she wasn't talking to him.
We found it in her pocket. She didn't believe in God.
What's the matter whether you believe?
I found Mom's diary.
What if she saw something out there?
Told y'all not to come.
So we are joined by Adrienne Biddle. She is of Unbroken Pictures and a producer on the all-new dread-filled atmospheric horror film, The Dark and the Wicked. The Dark and the Wicked comes out November 6th in theaters, digitally and on demand. So I guess the first thing, I don't normally get USC folks on here, although I've had a few. USC has a fantastic film school, so fight on. It's always great to have a fellow Trojan on the
Yeah,
video.
go Trojans.
So The Dark and the Wicked is an experience. It is so atmospheric, so much kind of tension built into it. It's something that really needs to be kind of seen and experienced in a really either a theater or a really good theatrical room with good speakers and sound, because there's so much kind of going on. The first question I have is, in this COVID world, which is kind of underlying anything that's coming on around now, what has it been like promoting a film in COVID, especially maybe a film that is getting a theatrical release, but something that seems like maybe people are still hesitant to go back to the theater. So what's it been like promoting a film during COVID, and what are the pros and cons been of it?
I mean, I think, for any indie film, there's always challenges, right? And, so I think sort of the side effect of COVID and a little bit of the blessing for the indie community, and I'm hoping for this film, is no big competition. So there's less, crazy, the new Marvel movie noise that you have to kind of get through. The con is really that there's obviously very important things on people's minds. And so, the real unknown is, are people paying attention to kind of new releases and what's coming out? And in the same way they might be, when there's less distracting stuff happening, and rightfully so. So I think, until we are released and until people show up, it'll be hard to say whether it was a blessing in disguise or whether it's, really just put a damper on all new releases for now. I mean, for me personally, it would have been nice, we've gotten such an overwhelmingly positive response from the critical community on the movie so far. I mean, beyond any of our expectations and wildest fantasies. It's certainly the best consistently reviewed movie of my career. That, you always hope that happens, and then your distributing partner is sort of like, okay, great, let's go wide or let's go bigger with the movie. And I do think that, RLJ has been a fantastic partner to us so far. And I do think that they would have done that on this movie, because, you can never really determine what chord a film will strike. And we'll never know. There's not the opportunity for them to do that in this case. But, there's certainly, people are excited and enthusiastic and supportive of the movie. So,
Exactly. Fingers crossed. That's a good point you bring up with an indie film. It is kind of tough to cut through that noise, and with everything kind of getting pushed back, at least the major films that people might be inundated with on TV and in theaters. It does kind of level the playing field, especially for someone looking for horror. There's only so much that can come out. So yeah, we'll see. I mean, it is the film is intense, but it is really well done. Like the set is fantastic. And it was filmed on is it the director's farm? Is that?
Yes. So I'll give you a little background and sort of the origin of all of this. So
sure.
I have one of my producing partners on the movie. I have two producing partners in the movie, Sunny Molly and Kevin Matuso, both of whom I've Bryan and I, and throughout, our careers have interacted with both of these folks in various ways. Kevin was instrumental in getting Black Coat's Daughter off the ground, and Sonny was one of the producers on The Strangers originally. So anyway, Bryan and Sonny had been talking on the phone, and Sonny, who's also a writer-director, had just finished making a movie in a very he had a unique production approach, something that we'd never done before, and something that he managed to pull off. And both Bryan and I saw the movie. It's fantastic. Blumhouse is releasing it, I believe, and the title got changed. It previously was known as Hurt, and now it's called, I think, Inspired by True Events. But the movie's great. That being said, Bryan watched the movie and called me up and said, we should try to do a movie like Sonny did, with this sort of production plan and this approach, obviously, but through our prism, the lens, our lens, and for me as a filmmaker. So we thought, okay, one of the things that's sort of irritating in the world is when you watch a movie and you're like, oh, they just couldn't get enough money, so they made it for less. I like to see movies that feel like they are organic to their size. Mm-hmm. And there are things that you can do and ways that you can tell stories that make them not feel like you're just spending less. So, Bryan and I were very, very aware, and, Bryan especially so, saying, I want to write a script and I want to make sure that it feels organic to to what our production approach is. And one of those things was making sure that, the exigencies of production, like the things that you can't control and whatever, let's keep those to a minimum. So the location in the movie, the central house that they're in, is actually the house that Bryan lives in and stays at when he goes to visit his family. It is on his family's working goat farm. And so he was there when we were sort of discussing this. And so he used that location as an inspiration to write from. And then sort of as he was going along, said, this actually makes good sense. Asked his family if we could shoot there. And they incredibly generously and graciously said yes. And so The Dark and the Wicked was born. So that is where Bryan writes often, is that house that you see in the film.
That is quite brave to have a film that has so much kind of atmospheric effects and the little creaks and the things that appear in your vision. Write that and film that in a place that you're going to then spend a lot of time in after, because I imagine that's going to be some interesting late nights when he's trying to write that.
I think that inspires him. I mean, he actually gets he gets afraid. And, I'm harder to scare, I don't scare in sort of atmospheric way, but that seems to be, juice for the mill.
I watch a lot of horror. I still jump at almost every jump scare, even though I know it's coming, even though I'm used to it.
Yeah.
But that's part of the fun. So, you clearly have a lot of horror in your career and especially at Unbroken Pictures. Is there something about horror that really draws you? Is it something that you just really like doing, or something that you've just kind of naturally gravitated towards?
I started at a very young age. I sort of like to joke that I think Stephen King really was the narrator of my youth. I was an avid reader, so I read more books than I watched movies as I was sort of growing up. And I was always sort of drawn and compelled to, very intimate personal stories, sort of exploring kind of the human condition and kind of the dark recesses of people's character and looking at the choices that they make. And one of the things that I always sort of liked, and it kept showing up in a lot of genre material, whether that be fantasy or hard sci-fi or horror, is the idea that sort of crisis clarifies. The sort of true nature of people is revealed in crisis. And I think that's interesting. I like to kind of cut through the bullshit and sort of, who are you, Mm-hmm. And so when I first entered the film business, when you sort of first start out, you're busy trying to figure out, like, how does this job, how does this work? So I spent my formative sort of early years kind of trying to get a handle on kind of the job. And then as you continue to go on, you start to realize, okay, what's really important and what separates me from everybody else is my point of view, my opinion. What is it? What about material gets me excited and passionate? And I found that the stuff that I sort of got the most jazzed by were, by and large, genre movies, science fiction, horror, dark thrillers, things like that. And so I started to realize that was kind of the wheelhouse that I enjoyed playing in the most. And certainly when Bryan and I first met, I was the studio executive at Rogue that sort of championed him to direct the film because he'd never directed anything before. But then I didn't actually work on the film itself. Another exec at the company sort of managed the day-to-day of that. And, so I was able to kind of appreciate the movie as a fan and say, I really like the way this filmmaker kind of deals with the parts that aren't said out loud, the quiet moments. I appreciated his patience as a filmmaker. And I looked around at the movies that I like to see that kept sort of pulling me back in, and they were very patient and there was a lot of tension in them. So it wasn't the splatter fest and it wasn't, the scream queen stuff. Like that just didn't kind of affect me in the same way. It was more of the patient, slow dread, tension, walking that fine tightrope. And I found that Bryan did that for me on the page. And certainly when we just talked about how we wanted sort of the genre to, what we wished we saw more of at that time, we longed for kind of those very serious, very respectable, very beautifully shot films of the 70s, whether it's Rosemary's Baby or Exorcist or The Shining, or, I can go on, but they weren't making movies like that really for a long time, and certainly when I was starting out in the business. And Bryan and I both liked movies like that and wanted to kind of do that for ourselves and felt like we had a position on that. So we kind of joined forces and we're hoping to kind of be the home for people who wanted to make movies like that. And so, it was a little harder than I think we both thought it was going to be. But nonetheless, I mean, I through lots of whatever, we managed to sort of find projects that inspired us in that direction and filmmakers that sort of, had that vision. This is the last movie Bryan and I, as Unbroken, will have made. But I think, part of that is just after a very intense 10-year relationship of any kind, like it's sort of time for us to see other people, so to speak. But, the truth, and some of that's for me to branch out a little bit in more of the genres that I love that we never really touched, science fiction, whether it's fantasy, different aspects in that way. And, but I'm really proud of the stuff that we did. And I think that, our mission statement of kind of trying to bring the seriousness and the beauty and the gravitas back to horror in our own little way, I'm hoping we push that ball a little bit forward. And audiences seem to be more receptive to coming to movies like that and have for the last, 5 or 6 years. So.
Yeah, no, definitely. And you definitely succeeded in this film to have a film that was slow and kind of, had a lot of unspoken messages, and also just had that, beautiful cinematography and dread and
Our
gravity
DP
to it.
won best DP at Sigis this year for this movie, so kudos to him.
There you go.
He really did a beautiful job. The movie is gorgeous.
And I think, the really nice thing about horror, a lot of people that don't watch a lot of horror kind of don't appreciate how wide of a net it casts. And so you can branch out into sci-fi, fantasy, and still kind of retain horror elements, have kind of a blend. And it doesn't mean you have to leave horror. You can just kind of go
Exactly.
to
And I mean, that's the thing. It's like, I like intimate stories against large backdrops, and where the backdrop is not, it's not about the world, it's about the people, but what is the sort of crazy what if premise behind it? And you can do that anywhere. And I think tension is what is compelling in cinema, so whatever genre you want to throw tension in, it doesn't really matter. So I completely agree with you.
Yeah. One of my best experiences in the theater was we saw The Lodge, back when theaters were there. And, after the show, the entire audience, there were only like 15 people, just visibly, audibly exhaled because we were all just kind of holding our breath the entire film. And I think you'll get a similar reaction with this one as well.
I hope so. The enjoyment of a movie doesn't always have to be a smile. It can be just something that stays with you and help, asks you to ask questions. So we hope we do that movie. This movie does that.
So two things you spoke about I really like to hear. The the one where you said that you like movies that show kind of what your character is, and this film definitely does. It feels like the characters here are very real, fleshed out characters in a horrible situation, and kind of their interactions and reactions do kind of highlight those two different paths that one could take. And I think that seems like it's a hallmark of your work, is that, it seems like something that you also looked for, maybe something that drew you to this specific script, or, Bryan specifically.
I think honestly, the theme in the my agency as a producer is to get to choose which projects I work on. Even though I don't create them, I certainly have an option. So I found that the stuff that I really was passionate about, that I was willing to kind of throw my full body into, was material that kind of exposed the realities of people, which is we are gray. We are not all good. We are not all bad. We are often complicated with very conflicting ethical positions on stuff, whether it's conscious or unconscious, and characters that explore, like as you mentioned, like the choices. And sometimes those choices are unexpected, because sometimes as people we make unexpected choices. And I really admire people that kind of march to the beat of their own drummer, and that we are quick as a society to rush to judgment on people. I'll take The Monster, or even Blackcoat's Daughter as an example, of characters that you want to throw these women in buckets, and then you find that is actually not an easy thing to do. And I believe that is how we are as humans. And so even a movie that I developed I wasn't sort of as hands-on on as all the rest of them, which is a movie called Stephanie, is the core aspect of that story is when the victim is the monster. And that to me is, again, sort of perfect hallmark of the duality of us, that we can do monstrous things, we can do heroic things, sometimes at the same time, sometimes and that is what's always really drawn me to the material that I've sort of picked. Those are the themes that I like to explore. And one of the things about The Dark and the Wicked, as you mentioned, is I loved when I first read, when Bryan pitched the idea and then he went off to write the script, and then, I read the first draft, was the idea that you have two characters who were kind of set up that we put on them what we think, we think they are.
Yep.
And as the movie unfolds, you realize that we were probably wrong. And yet in that incorrect assessment, it's not because we were cheated. It wasn't because we steered you in one direction or the other. It's like you have to recognize your own prejudgments, which I think is important to do in life anyway, as many of our issues of the time sort of highlight. And that we bring those prejudgments to the table. And I like to strip that away, because oftentimes we're wrong.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think, the last few years have shown people that there's a lot of prejudgments, and they're often wrong, or at least more nuanced than I think
correct
anyone would.
And that's the fun, that's the fun of this art form, is that you can play with that. And horror in particular, if dramas do it, but I think you get a larger audience and a more diverse audience if you stick a vampire or a creature or a ghost. You know what I mean? You can tell the same really dark, very intensely woven stories that force you to ask those questions and to look at yourself. But I compare it to sort of like cherry flavored cough syrup. You need the medicine, but it tastes good.
Yeah. And it's blood red too. So there
you go.
So one thing I wanted to ask is, this film is, we've talked about it. It's very dark. It's very heavy. It has a lot of tension and dread. What was it like to film? Were there moments of levity? I imagine there must have been, but it's just kind of tough to see those in a film that is so serious and so kind of nuanced in what's going on.
I mean, there was a lot of camaraderie. We were an incredibly small crew, and we we're all in the middle of buttfuck Texas, and so that kind of creates its own experience. I think there was a passion, there had to have been, in order for sort of these professionals to come and do what we did on the scale in which we did it. We had committed people, and they were all pros, and we couldn't have done it without any of them. I mean, our crew was so spectacular. But and you had these actors had just said, we're going to feet first. No one's doing this for the money. You know what I mean? So, so it was sort of a communal idea that, we're here to do this very intense, very deep, kind of very often sad thing. And that kind of brought people together. It wasn't particularly look, so many of the people that I work with are very, very funny, contrary to the work that we make. And so that's always a good time. But I mean, I think everybody came there understanding the story that we were telling and how personal it is to a lot of people. So, that contributed to a bonding experience. But it wasn't bad. You know what I mean? It was actually quite great. And, you know, because we were on Bryan's family's farm, there was a sense of sort of obviously respect for the property and the set, you know what I mean? But there was just I don't know, kind of everybody pitched in, and there was a real sense of warmth in that way. So it was a good shoot. I mean, it was grueling, you know, shooting nights is always rough, you know, actors having to take themselves through the ringer, and, you know, Marin just left it all on the field. I mean, she's an extraordinary actor, and Michael did an amazing job. So, but yeah, it was good.
Excellent. That's what we like to hear. So we're almost out of time. I just wanted to ask, you know, it sounds like you are, you know, you mentioned that you're kind of going to explore some new things. So is there anything specifically on the horizon next for you, or some sort of,
I mean, the sad truth of COVID has thrown a wrench in, I think, you know, everything at this moment in time. So I've been reading a lot of books. I've been talking with a lot of people that I have wanted to work with. You know, Sunny and I have been sort of, you know, throwing around some ideas, but nothing really solid yet. I mean, I kind of want to see, going back to my original point, like I want whatever I do next to be organic to the world in which we live. And since we don't know what that looks like, I don't want to kind of force a square peg into a round hole. So I'm kind of stockpiling my creative juices and ideas, but I'm not really, you know, I'm kind of waiting to see how this all shakes out.
That sounds like a good plan. Yeah, make sure to work on yourself and work on your own, you know, thoughts and inspirations, and then you can go out when the world is back to normal, or at least some semblance of normal.
You know, send money.
Well, send money by watching the film. It's
that's right.
The Dark and the Wicked is released November 6th in theaters, digitally, and on demand. This has been Adrienne Biddle. Thank you so much for joining me. This is a blast. Fight on.
Thanks, David. I really appreciate it.
Right.
Be well. Be safe. Bye.
That was Adrienne Biddle, a producer on The Dark and the Wicked, which is coming to theaters, digitally, and on demand on November 6th. If you like this interview, please like and subscribe to this channel. It helps me out a lot and make sure all my new videos go straight to you. And as always, please go to watcherpass.com for all your movie reviews, interviews, and recommendations. Thank you.